Okay, it looks like we are now live streaming.
Live. Yeah. Okay, hello, and welcome to the Capitola Planning Commission meeting of March 31st, 2022. In accordance with California Senate Bill 361, this meeting is not physically open to the public. Commissioners and staff are meeting via Zoom, and there are several ways for the public to watch and participate. Information on how to join the meeting using the Zoom application or the landline/mobile phone, along with how to submit public comment during the meeting tonight, is available on our website, cityofcapitola.org, and on the published meeting agenda. As always, this meeting is cablecast.
Okay, it looks like we've got a glitch. As always, this meeting is cablecast, is what we heard last.
As always, this meeting is cablecast live on Charter Communications, Cable TV Channel 8 in the city of Capitola, and on Channel 25 throughout Santa Cruz County. The meeting is being recorded to be rebroadcast, I assume it is, following Monday and Friday at 1 p.m. Meetings can also be streamed live on YouTube or on the city's website. Our technician tonight is Victor. And with that, let's move on to item number 1, which is roll call. Louis, we have the roll call.
Yes, please. Commissioner Christensen. Commissioner Ruth.
Here.
Commissioner Newman.
I was on mute, sorry.
Are you asking me, Westman?
Commissioner Westman.
I'm here.
Chair Wilk.
Also here, and for the record, Courtney Christensen is here. So we have 100% attendance. With that, we can move on to oral communications. Are there any additions or deletions to the agenda?
No additions or deletions this evening.
Okay, and with that, we can then move to item 2B, which is public comment. Here is an opportunity for any member of the public to comment on things that are not on the agenda, either via email or Zoom. Members of the public may speak up for 3 minutes. Individuals may not speak for more than once during oral communications. All speakers must address the entire legislative body and will not be permitted to engage in dialogue. Do we have any general public comments?
I'm viewing the list of participants, and there's no hands raised. And now I'm going to check our public comment emails, and there are no new emails in our emails.
Very good. Let's move on to item C, commission comments. Do any of the commissioners wish to make a comment on something not on the agenda? Seeing none, let's move on to staff comments. Katie, are there any staff comments over and above the agenda?
No staff comments this evening.
Very good. We'll move right along then to public hearings. We have 2 items. Item A, which is SB Ordinance number 1049, and B, which is Ordinance for Objective Design Standards. Item A has to do with amendments to the Capitola Municipal Code on 2-unit developments, urban lot splits, accessory dwelling units, and some definitions. Do we have a staff report on item A? No staff report. Shall we move on to item B?
Sorry. First, I'm going to ask Sean Planner Sasanto if he can bring Terrence Bottomley into our panel this evening. So this evening, Ben Noble is here of Ben Noble Regional Planning, and also Terrence Bottomley, who goes by Terry. They're both here and have been helping work on the SB9 Ordinance, and Ben will be also presenting on our Objective Standards Ordinance. So with that, Ben is going to do the presentation this evening and take it from there. But we opened this discussion at our February hearing on SB9, and as we're fine-tuning it, we need further direction from the Planning Commission.
All right. You want me to take it from here?
Yeah, are you able to pull up your slideshow?
I will.
Excuse me, before we do that, somebody is causing some background noise, and it would be good if everyone could mute until they need to speak.
Oops.
It's the wrong presentation. Bear with me 1 minute. Everybody can read my email. Okay. Is the title slide up on the screen now? For Sb9 study? Great. Okay. So good evening. My name's Ben Noble. I'm assisting the city with the Sb9 Ordinance. And also with me tonight is Terry Bottomley of Bottomley Design and Planning, who's working with me on this work as well. And after the Planning Commission's last meeting on the subject, Katie asked me and Terry to assist her with a few things to make revisions to the ordinance in light of Planning Commission comments at the last meeting, and also to study some issues associated with this subject. So the purpose of the meeting tonight is for us to share with you the results of some of the modeling work that we've done related to the Sb9 ordinance, and receive your feedback on some higher level policy issues related to development standards for projects under Sb9. So just a little bit of review about what Sb9 is. It's state law that went into effect at the beginning of this year that requires all cities to allow 2 dwelling units on 1 parcel in a single family zone if the development meets certain requirements, but also to allow for an urban lot split within single family zones with 2 units allowed on each of the 2 newly created parcels. So on most single family lots, up to 4 units are allowed under Sb9, and the units are limited to size to, where cities can limit the size of the units to 800 square feet. And the minimum parcel size for a urban lot split is 1,200 square feet. So if you have a parcel that's as small as 2,400 square feet, that can be split into 2 with 2 800 square foot units on each of those lots for a total of 4 units. And so Sb9 applies within the R1 zone in Capitola, and it applies both within the coastal zone and outside of the coastal zone. And here's a zoning map where all of the R1 districts are shown in yellow. So it includes a variety of neighborhoods ranging from Cliffwood Heights with a typical lot size of about 6,000 square feet, all the way to Riverview Terrace with a typical lot size as small of 2,800 square feet.
And do you mind if we ask questions along the way rather than waiting till the end?
The presentation is relatively short, but I would say if you have a clarifying question on anything that I'm saying, feel free to interrupt.
I do, and the one is, you mentioned the Coastal Commission, this being applied within and both in the coastal zone and out of the coastal zone. As I recall, last time it was up in the air as to whether or not coastal zone was going to be included because we needed to apply, and they were still on the fence, and I don't know the status of that. I know it's in the presentation. It also seems to indicate that it's still not decided.
So I can chime in on that. The coastal staff is working on providing us guidance towards that matter. So my understanding is that it is applicable within the coastal zone, but we're going to have to build in extra review standards tied to the coastal zone and like flood areas and certain within certain circumstances. So that is something that Ben and I will coordinate on to make sure that their requests are in the next version that goes before Planning Commission.
Right. The coastal commission will likely require additional coastal resource protections within the coastal zone.
Thank you.
Okay. So on February 3rd, the Planning Commission previously considered the draft SB9 ordinance and provided feedback on a number of issues. I think one of the higher level issues that was discussed by the Planning Commission is the challenge of accommodating 4 800 square foot units on smaller size lots. In addition to that discussion, there was some more specific feedback on commission priorities related to development standards. One had to do with the desire to protect front yards, to allow for building placement and setbacks from the front property line consistent with the existing character of residential neighborhoods, and some feedback about porches not projecting into the front yard. In terms of side and rear setbacks, the Planning Commission was looking at that as an opportunity to allow for some flexibility in development standards in order to accommodate up to 4 units. Some feedback on allowing for reduced interior side setbacks and rear setbacks as a way to accommodate up to 4 units. Similarly, looking at building separation and that being a standard that potentially could be adjusted or eliminated in order to accommodate units. There was feedback on the desire to minimize driveway widths and curb cuts, to direct parking to the side or to the rear of the homes. Also some direction on allowing up to 1,200 square feet units on larger lots, particularly as a way to encourage or incentivize 2 or 3 unit projects that might have less of an impact on the neighborhood. Also some feedback on allowing 2 stories, but limiting the second story to 22 feet. So with that feedback, Katie asked me and Terry to proceed with helping her on revisions to the ordinance. And one of the most important things that we needed to do was to further study how 2, 3, and 4 unit projects could be accommodated on typical lot sizes within the R1 districts in Capitola. So we prepared some models that's included in the Planning Commission packet for the meeting tonight. And for those models, we assumed 800 square foot units. We also studied options with both with and without on-site parking, primarily because we were very curious to see what effect that would have on what is possible on these lots. We're not recommending removing the parking requirements. They're more just as a reference for everybody's consideration. And so in terms of the lot sizes that we looked at, we have 3 typical lot sizes, beginning with 2,800 square feet for, that's typical for the Riverview Terrace neighborhood. We prepared models for 3,200 square foot lots, which is typical in Jewel Blocks and Depot Hill. And then also for 6,000 square foot lots, that's typical in Cliffwood Heights. So with that, I'm going to hand the presentation over to Terry, who's going to walk through the modeling. Oh, first, before I do that, here's just some images of some of these typical of these neighborhoods that we've been looking at. So Riverview Terrace, where typical lot sizes are 2,800 square feet. Depot Hill, typical lot size 3,200 square feet. And then Cliffwood Heights at 6,000 square feet. So we've been thinking about these specific neighborhoods and lot configurations and existing development patterns. So with that, I will hand it over to Terry.
Okay, we started by looking at the smallest lots first, the 2,800 square foot lots. And as Ben said, our sort of starting criteria was 2-story buildings, 800 square feet, preferably a sort of a decent setback in the front, 15 feet was what we assumed would be good to start with. In the upper right here, you can see a pretty constrained and fully covered site with 4 units, 800 square feet. And basically what it shows is that on the smaller lots, it's really hard to sort of get to the interior of the property, right? Because it's so small. And you'll see we have surface parking shown in the front setback area, mainly because it's the only place we could sort of fit it on the property at 2 stories. You know, you've got, as you can see, we've got double aspect or 2-sided units that really only have windows on 2 sides. And the setbacks are really minimal. So it's very constrained. And as we looked at many of the sites, the smaller sites, options for the smaller sites, it became obvious that sticking with the 2 stories was going to be really challenging. So we looked at 3 stories as well. In the lower left, you can see a 3-story option where there's garage parking rather than surface parking along the street. And we are shown sort of an unusual center drive out to the center of the site to access the rear buildings. On the lower right, a more conventional driveway. Both show, I think, the sort of challenge in terms of getting to garage parking or non-surface parking along the street at the rear center portion of the site. Next slide. As Ben said, we also just really for checking the effect, looked at some options that did not have on-site parking. And on the left, 2-story, on the right, 3-story structures. And you can see there's quite a lot of improvement in terms of the aspects of the building as well as the on-site open space. One of the things that these images show as well is the difference in going from 2 to 3 stories. You can sort of easily see the increase in on-site open space, or garden space, landscape space, or whatever, as the footprint shrinks when you go to 3 stories. Next slide. We also looked at less than 4-unit options. In the upper right, sticking with 2 stories, 3 units, still largely because of the lot width, very hard to get to the rear or interior portion of the site with a car. Again, 2-aspect building, surface parking in front, a lot of driveway along the frontage, which is not great. In the lower left, going to 3 stories, sort of a interior driveway along one property line. The front building would have a garage access from the street. And in the lower right, a 2-unit option that seems to fit pretty well at 2 stories. It's sort of more typical in what you see in a lot of neighborhoods in the East Bay, where I live, where there's an existing single-family house and a second standalone structure is developed at the back of the property. Next slide. By the way, we can come back and look at any of these in detail after I go through. I'm going to sort of go kind of quickly because, as you can imagine, there's quite a bit of details and assumptions in each of these sketches. But first, it seemed like a good idea just to do sort of a quick overview. Going to the next size lot, 40 by 80, 3,200 square feet. Really, the options don't change that much. Site's still constrained. The 40-foot width makes it difficult to get to the interior of the site. Double aspect buildings in the upper right. Lower left, you can see some more room in terms of setbacks with the depth along the frontage, but similar options that we had developed for the 40 by 70 parcels. Next slide. Again, looking at no on-site parking options, quite a bit of open spaces freed up on the larger lot, with the particularly with the smaller footprints for 3-story buildings. Next slide. And with the lower number of options on the site, things tend to improve quite a bit for this because of the additional lot depth. It's possible to get surface parking rather than garage parking, as well as garage parking onto these properties, depending on the configuration. Lower left, sort of tuck-in parking between buildings. In the center and the bottom, surface parking at the rear of the lot. And on the right, 3-story buildings with garage parking accessed from the interior of the site rather than from the frontage. Next slide. And 2 units and 2 stories, things are quite a bit easier. Next slide. Now on the 60 by 100 properties, things are quite easy and there are quite a few options. Upper right, surface parking. It's sort of interesting. One of the things that we realized is that on the smaller properties, to accommodate parking, it's actually more expensive than it is in larger properties because the land area is so constrained, you sort of have to build a garage to sort of address the parking, whereas in the larger parcels, there's just enough room to have surface parking and not necessarily have to build a garage. In the lower left here, 4 standalone units, sharing a common driveway, parking from an interior parking court, garage parking. And on the lower right, sort of a townhouse configuration where the townhouses are turned perpendicular to the street with garage access from a side driveway. And that is my overview. If you have questions, we're more than willing to dig in at some point.
Yeah. And so I'll take it over from here, unless there are questions
I have a
about
question.
Susan. Yes.
This is just to clarify. So when we talk about a 2-story building, you used 22 feet in height. If we're talking about a 3-story building, what are we talking about as far as the height of those buildings?
Sure. We assume, just for the sake of doing the drawings, that the building heights would be 30 feet to the eave line, and then another 5 feet to accommodate a pitched roof. As Ben and Katie and I have been talking about the height issue over the last week or so, though, there's flexibility in there because a lot of the height discussion depends on assumptions about the interior ceiling height in the units. Mm-hmm. So we didn't necessarily get too picky about that at this point. That's sort of a granular discussion that we know Planning Commission is interested in. But for the modeling, we sort of kept it simple and just assumed, 22 feet to the eave line for 2 stories and 30 feet to the eave line for 3 stories.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so this slide is an attempt to, in a very simple way, present the choice that Capitola has on implementing SB9 for smaller lots. One of the things that we discovered is that 5,500 square feet appears to us to be the cutoff where things get really difficult for 3 and 4 unit projects. For 5,500 square feet or less lot, what Terry's models showed is that for a 2-unit project, the city can achieve, I think, most of what the Planning Commission previously was looking for in terms of development standards. That for 2 units with 800 square feet units, you can stay at 2 stories you can have a front setback of 10 feet, which is not 15 feet, but it's still something. And you can have the parking located behind the street-facing building. So you can have a configuration that's sort of similar to what you get with a rear ADU, something that certainly would fit into an existing neighborhood from a design perspective. And then for these smaller lots, for 3 and 4 units, it gets a lot more challenging. And the city is going to need to prioritize certain things when developing the standards that would apply to these projects. If somebody comes in and requests 3 units or 4 units on one of these lots under SB9, the city's going to have to allow it, subject to its standards. So the question then becomes, well, what is most important, and what are the standards to establish for these types of projects? And sort of the way we see it, starting with 3-unit projects, is that there are two options really to accommodate three 800 square foot units on these smaller lots. Option 1 is to keep it at 2 stories and have parking in the front setback, and have the building setback 18 feet from the front property line. The other option is to allow more height, 3 stories, which would allow for the parking to be behind the street-facing front building with a setback of 10 feet. That would be option 2. There's also the possibility that within a 2.5-story building, so within if the 3rd story is built within the roof, that might also be possible as well. I'll show that in a slide in a moment. But that seems for a 3-unit project, those seem to be the main options. And we're expecting that within the ordinance, standards for a 2-unit project versus a 3-unit project versus a 4-unit project, they're going to be different. And that's how we're expecting the ordinance to be set up. And then so for 4 units on a small lot, this is the most sort of constrained, tight development scenario. Option 1, which is the 2-story option, again, the 4 parking spaces would need to be in that front setback area. Option 2, 3 stories, the building would need to be built to the front setback line, but that would allow for parking to be in the rear behind the front street-facing building. And we recognize that neither of these options are particularly good from a design perspective, but it is the sort of reality that we face with SB9. And it's quite possible that no applicant will ever come forward with a 3 or 4 unit project on a small lot under SB9, but it is possible that they could do that. And so the city wants to have the standards in place that can accommodate those types of projects in the way that sort of does the least harm to the character of the neighborhood. And I guess I should also say on the slide is that there is the option to not require on-site parking. There is the option to require maybe less parking, maybe half a space per unit, for example, which could have an effect on the design of the project. I think we came into this meeting expecting that the Planning Commission's preference would be to continue to always require 1 parking space on a lot. And so we're asking for confirmation that that is indeed the Planning Commission's preference. But another option is to modify the parking requirement. So as I mentioned previously, for a 3-unit project, it may also be possible to accommodate the 3 units within a 2.5-story project on lots that are less than 5,500 square feet. Here's an image from a project in Santa Cruz that has a third story built within that roof form. Here's a little model of what that might look like. So you'd have 20 feet up to the eave, total building height of 33 feet, but that third story built into that roof element. So for 3-unit projects on small lots, this may be a possibility as well.
Ben, if I could interrupt you for 1 second,
Sure.
to point on that picture of that unit in Santa Cruz.
Mm-hmm.
They went through, I'm sure, design criteria and Arc and Site had to be approved by the city. And we don't have that option with SB9. They
That
have
is
to be
correct.
objective. They have to be objective standards.
That's
So
correct.
whatever
So,
somebody submits, we have to approve. So we'll never get anything that looks like that.
right. So there would be no discretionary design review process, but the city does have the ability to establish objective design standards that could apply to a project like this.
So are you ready to hear what we want or?
I'm almost done, almost done.
Okay.
Okay. And then, so as we were saying before, lots 5,500 square feet or more, we think that the city can get most of what it wants, even on a 4-unit project, limiting it to 2 stories, front setback of 15 feet, and parking located behind the street-facing building. And so in terms of building height, if we go to allowing, or I guess, our recommendation in terms of building heights is if it's a 1-story building, 16 feet, similar to what the ADU ordinance is. For a 2-story building, we would recommend establishing a maximum height of 20 feet to the eave with 5 additional feet for a sloped roof as a way to encourage pitched roofs and not force flat roofs.
Question
And then, yes.
on with regards to the 2 and even the 3-story, did you do a daylight plane study to see how a 3-story or a 2.5-story would affect neighbors?
No, we didn't.
Okay, because I would. All right, thank you.
I have a question.
Yes.
What is the motivation for the steeply sloped roof?
Oh, just from a neighborhood compatibility perspective, that having a pitched roof rather than a flat roof would be more harmonious with the
But
existing
that's a pretty
neighborhood
steep
character.
pitch, which makes more sense in areas where you have snow.
Are you talking about this?
Well, you're 5 feet from you're allowing 5 feet for the roof slope.
Yeah, I guess, and I would have Terry weigh in on this, whether 5 feet is the right additional amount or if it could be less than that.
5 feet is kind of medium, I think we were looking at a 5 to 12 slope max. Ben, I think you had an image, if you back up a sec, that's not particularly steep. One more maybe.
It's going forward.
Maybe it was forward. Maybe
Oh, it's forward, okay.
Yeah. We're
That
thinking
one.
something more like this, right? This is probably a little less than 5 feet from the eave line to the peak, but it's not super steep. I mean, 5 feet generally isn't going to result in a very steep.
So this is somebody's opinion of what is aesthetically most desirable in Capitola?
Well, I think our assumption was that it just fits in. I mean, most of the neighboring houses have pitched roofs rather than flat roofs. So yeah, it seemed like it would be good to accommodate that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if accommodating sloped roofs is not a priority for the planning commission, that maintaining a maximum height of 22 feet without any sort of additional height to accommodate a pitched roof is certainly available as an option. And then the last thing with the front porch, here's an example of a multi-unit building in a primarily single-family neighborhood that, in sort of my opinion, does a relatively good job of fitting in to the existing character. And one of the reasons for that is that it has a front porch that projects into the front setback. And so I think from our perspective, it wouldn't improve the neighborhood compatibility of the project to prohibit that front porch. I think if that porch was absent from this project, it would reduce its compatibility with adjacent development. Okay, so that sort of concludes our presentation, and I think that our mindset with all of this is to sort of help Capitola figure out the best way to comply with the requirements of SB9 in a way that produces or will accommodate development that is most compatible with the existing neighborhood character. And so that's really what our thinking has been with all of this work that we've been doing. And in terms of the requested Planning Commission input tonight, for lots less than 5,500 square feet, confirming that the desire is to continue to require 1 parking space per unit for 2, 3, and 4 unit projects, and to provide feedback on which of the options for the 3 to 4 unit projects is preferable. And we would then use that to craft our standards that would come back to you in a revised ordinance. And then for the lots that are 5,500 square feet or more, for you to confirm that the height, front setback, and parking location standards that we've shown is consistent with what you'd like to see. And then finally, on these last 2 items, feedback on measurement of building height for 2-story projects, and then also the issue of allowing front porches within the front setback area. So that's a summary of really what we're hoping to receive feedback on tonight. And during the Planning Commission's discussion and deliberation on this, if you need us to go back to any of the slides that was shown in the presentation, we can do that. And then, so I think that the plan was after the presentation, if there are any public comments, that would be a good time to receive them before the Planning Commission begins its deliberation.
Yes, I agree. So staff, can you reach out to the public and see if there are any public comments on this presentation?
Okay, I'm looking at the attendees in our Zoom call. We have 3 attendees. There are no hands raised. I'm going to go to our public comment email, and I do not see any members of the public that have submitted public comment on this. So with that, I think you're able to close the public hearing.
All right, let's close the public hearing then on this item and move on to commission comments. So anybody want to jump in first?
And Chair Wilk, I don't know, do you have a preference for me to stop the sharing of the screen so everyone can see one another sort of in full screen mode, or do you prefer for me to keep the presentation up?
It might be better for you to keep the presentation up because chances are people are going to want you to go back and read certain slides.
Okay, I'll do that then.
Well, I'll go first if no one else is interested. For me, for lots less than 5,500 square feet, I think it's important to continue to have on-site parking because those are the neighborhoods that currently have the worst parking situations. If you look at the Riverview Terrace neighborhood, the streets are fully parked every night now without any additional units going in. So for me, I would like to see on-site parking stay. I I understand that that means that we're probably going to have to go to 3 stories on those sites. And I would like to see the 3 stories be as low as it possibly can without, having too much impact. And that would probably mean putting a 3rd story in a pitched roof, similar to the example that you showed. So do you want me to stop there? Or do you want me to go through the whole list and then give someone else a time?
Well, why don't you go through the whole list?
Okay. For the lots of, the 5,500 square feet of more, I like the idea again of on-site parking, and sounds like 2 stories are going to work in those situations. For the building heights, I would like to see them be as low as it possibly can be. I understand the desire for the pitched roof. I think that does fit into most of our residential neighborhoods. So however that works out, something between 23 and 25 feet sounds like where we'd be. And I don't have a problem, having a smallish type porch entryway kind of thing in the 15-foot front setback. I wouldn't like to see the front setback any smaller than perhaps like 10 feet. So those are my initial comments.
Can I comment on your comments?
Sure.
One thought when he mentioned the porch, and it does look like the porch is a nice thing, but I also know that people have a tendency to enclose porches. So suddenly the porch is not as beautiful thing. It's now just kind of like they do garage. It's now living space. So I don't know.
Well, I think we can put some language in there that requires that they remain as porches and can't be enclosed in the ordinance, which would solve that problem.
Okay, I'd like to weigh in now, please.
Okay, Mick, go ahead.
Yeah, I agree with Susan, except on the 3-story option. I believe on the smaller lots, if you're unfortunate enough to have to live on the east or west side of one of those projects, you don't get any light at all. I'd rather hassle the parking than not have any sunlight in my yard. I think that's important to people. But I'd like to make a serious proposal. I'd like to propose that we request the council to rezone all our R1 neighborhoods that have lots less than 5,500 square feet to an RM designation. That way, they are not subject to SB9. They still have the potential to build multiple units with adequate setbacks. And we don't have to worry about this. I think that makes a lot of sense.
So Katie's going to tell us why we can't do it.
I've actually been brainstorming that one, Commissioner Ruth, and I appreciate your comments. I did ask the city attorney for some feedback on this, and as you know, in state law in California, you cannot downzone a property. And so now that we have state regulations for the R1 to allow up to 4 units of 800 square feet, if we were to rezone these to multifamily, we would have to rezone them at a level that we would have to revise our multifamily to allow at least 4 800 square foot units. So I see where you were headed with this, but I did check in on that, and I don't think it is permissible under state law.
Well, I think it's worth a try.
Yeah, I was kind of hoping that myself, but.
The other comment I wanted to make was, and this is for anybody that's listening, there is a movement to repeal this SB9 ordinance, and it's called Our Neighborhood Voices. And if you go to ourneighborhoodvoices.com, you can see how to participate to repeal this ordinance. They're hoping to get it on the ballot in 2024. And You know, there's a lot of current and former city officials that are involved in this. And I think if there's enough public outcry once they find out about this, this ordinance or law will be repealed. So as I told you, Katie, I think it's foolish to spend a lot of time on this. I know we're required to, but I think this thing is going to go in the trash heap in just about a year and a half.
With that, I do appreciate your time spent on this, and if it does get reversed, that you know, as we're seeing, this is very trying on our small lots. So I hear your comments. With that, Commissioner Ruth, I just want to clarify from what I heard. I heard you say keep the on-site parking requirement.
I would prefer that over 3 stories.
But and you're saying the parking like don't take the parking off the property altogether, require it in the front yard?
I would rather see it in the front yard than a 3-story building on a 40 by 80 or 70 by 80 or 70 by 40 lot.
Okay, so what we see in option A here.
Yeah.
Okay, and then let's just go through the other questions. We get all your feedback. So for the 5,500 square foot lots, you're okay with as long as it stays to two stories, parking in the back as we were directed at the last meeting. Building height, do you want to comment on that?
I would agree with Susan. I think sloped roofs are important, and we should try to limit the height to as low as possible.
Okay, thank you. And then within the front yard setback, would you allow for a minimum front porch? Our current R1 standard is to allow a porch to extend 4 feet into the front yard setback. So that's what we were thinking as a standard, just being consistent with the R1.
Well, if we allow that, then we force the parking into the street
Oh,
and go higher.
you're right. That wouldn't be allowed if in your scenario with the parking in front, but.
I think it would only be possible with a 2-unit project.
Can I ask a question about, since both Susan and Mick made a question about sloped roofs? I just keep thinking of 19th Avenue in San Francisco and all those row houses where they have the Italianate tops, you know, they're all quote unquote flat roofs, but they're decorative and very interesting and part of the, you know, the San Francisco look. So is everybody thinking of flat roofs in terms of, yeah, I don't want to look at a box, or is it true? Is it daylight plane type of issues, or is it just, you know, I just think it's lovelier?
I think it's an issue of compatibility with the neighborhood.
Okay.
And I think if you look at a lot of the older houses in sort of the, at least Riverview Terrace neighborhood, they have a pitched roof, but it's not a real high pitch. So, you know, I think we could look at how much the roof is going to be pitched. And someone would have to, you know, sort of come out and calculate that. I can't tell you exactly what they are, but they're definitely not real steep roofs.
Got it. All right. Thank you. That was helpful. Any other commissioners?
Well, I'm waiting my turn.
Go ahead.
Okay, so first thing that before I get to specifics that concerns me or puzzles me about this is what is it going to be? How is it going to be received in the marketplace? I mean, even if it's not repealed, as Commissioner Ruth is predicting, does anyone really want to do this in Capitola? Or will anyone really want to do this in Capitola? And I don't think anyone knows that yet at this point. And that takes me to, that segues to the issue of if we establish these criteria, we could, one motivation could be to make it undesirable for people to take advantage of SB9. so that the requirements which technically meet SB9 would not be attractive to a developer or to a property owner. Just assuming anybody would want to do it anyway. And the one that first comes to mind in that is to absolutely, like everyone seems to agree, is require on-site parking. And in Capitola, that's really important because parking is such a critical issue in Capitola. It's not only an issue for those of us who live in Capitola, but it's an issue for those who visit Capitola on so many different occasions throughout the year. And we can't just keep pouring residents' cars onto the streets. It's gonna, the effect of that on Capitola would be pretty severe. So I think that's one standard that we need to emphasize the most of. We're gonna have to yield somewhere to make these projects work. For me, the criterion that is the most flexible would be height. I mean, I understand that historically Capitola had mostly one-story houses and little cottages, and then everybody built two-story houses, and now we may have to move to three-story in order to satisfy this the new statutes. So that's the standard that I have the most flexibility on. And as far as the specifics here that I haven't really covered in my general comments, I don't really have any strong feelings about front porches. I don't agree that we need to have really steep roofs as a matter of city policy here. I think if a 5 and 12 slope is nice, but so are other slopes. And I don't think we need to have 5 feet from the I forget what it's called, the top of the ceiling to the top of the roof. If people are concerned about the total height limitation, which I'm not really that concerned about. So in a way, it's kind of a non-issue for me. So I think I covered everything in one way or another in that rambling dissertation.
Let me ask a question that occurred to me during one of your comments, and that is, well, we could require this to be so unattractive, if you will, or so restrictive that no one no developer would even want to start it because they wouldn't be able to sell it. And my thought there is it possible for us to do exactly that? It just be very restrictive, but then allow for variances. So we say, okay, here is the exact house that you must build. But if you want to show us something else, we'll accept a variance. Can we do that, or is that not in the spirit of SB9?
The way we drafted the original ordinance is that it must comply with all the objective standards that we create in order to qualify for an SB9 project. One avenue you could take in this is to make something else more desirable. So if you'd like to see, if you think maybe 2 units fit better on an R1 parcel than these 4 800 square foot units, you could build in an incentive of allowing duplexes in your R1 zone to incentivize a developer to build a duplex. But you also have to remember, with the new ADU law, if we allow a duplex, they also can build with a duplex an ADU. So it still results in 3 new units. So there's ways to incentivize other options on the lot through like your floor area, the density allowance under R1. Those things we could look at if the Planning Commission would like us to incentivize, like a duplex with another ADU. But there is definitely a movement abound for possibly repealing SB9. So I would caution us of going too far into too many incentives, because you won't be able to reverse those.
Well, my thought really is more along the lines of okay, we're all kind of imagining what these architects are going to come up with, and we're using worst case scenarios or whatever. And my thought is, well, if we kind of just pick, we got all these options, A, B, C, whatever. If we just said, no, we're only going to allow B or whatever, and then say, but if you come up with an attractive A or C option, if the planning commission could, say, okay, well that's we're only allowing the one, but we'll allow a variance. And that way, we would have an option, at least if someone's very creative and comes up with something beautiful that we didn't imagine, we could say, yeah, go, all right, well, that's fine. We'll accept it.
Commissioner Wilkes, if someone comes up with a really ugly building, we don't have the option to change it.
Well, that's why we would say only this particular option is acceptable. So we'd limit it very tightly and say we only accept this one. But if they come up with a different option, let's say, something, we say we insist on a 15-foot setback, for example, but they come up with something that's really attractive that has got a 2-foot setback. It's like, well, okay, well, can we grant a waiver? We'll say, all right.
Yeah, but see, I think you're overlooking a provision of SB9 that says basically we have to accept what they present. We can't change it. So if we have design criteria, like you say, but if they submit something else, unless if I'm wrong, correct me, Katie, but if they submit something else, we can't change it.
No, it's a staff level review. We would deny it. So whatever we put into these objective standards, they have to comply with, as long as, that's why we're going through this exercise to see what they actually build the 4 units on the lot, and then to direct how they should build it. So we wouldn't be able to take this forward for a variance because it's a staff level review.
What if we had an objective standard that they had to have 200 windows?
A glass building.
You'd probably be
No,
receiving
and they had to
a
have,
letter.
they had to be Italian and handmade.
Yeah,
You
we-
would be receiving a letter from the Attorney General.
Why? That's objective.
Yeah, I think that cities cannot establish standards that makes the housing infeasible.
And there have been a few cities that have attempted, and they have received letters.
Well,
Let me address a different issue.
Staff level, so we couldn't do a waiver since it's a staff level approval. So our chance to make any decisions is right now.
Okay, Katie, I'd like to address a different issue. Let's assume I'm splitting my 6,000 square foot lot, and I'm putting the SB9 units on one half, but I want to build a single family home on the other half. Is that single family home subject to the R1 setback requirements?
It would be reviewed as an SB9 project, and it would be subject to these new development standards. So the only exception being is if there were an existing home on the site that was greater than 800 square feet, that home's allowed to stay, and you can do your subdivision for the other 2 new units on the separate lot, knowing that lot has to be at least 40% of the existing total square footage of the lot. But so you could keep one larger house on the lot if it was existing, but if you subdivide it, all the new units on the 2 lots, if it were subdivided and vacant, all the new units would be subject to the SB9 standards, which currently we have it drafted at 800 square feet per unit. And at the last planning commission meeting, there was discussion of allowing that to go up to 1,200 square feet for the larger lots.
So would that 1,200 square feet apply to an R1 single family home on the lot split?
The lot split would have to comply with whatever standards we have in place for the SB9. They would, so the 4-foot rear yard setback, it would not, they could build something as long as it's only 800 square feet
But if I wanted to build a single family home on the lot split, could it exceed 1,200 square feet?
No.
It can't. Okay. And then I have one other question. So let's say I demolish everything on my lot. I don't split it and I want to build a new single family home. Now I'm subject to the setback requirements and I challenge it in court. And there's a provision in the Constitution, equal protection under the laws. So if I challenge this in court, do you think I could be successful in eliminating all the setback requirements on my R1 home?
It's a great question, and I don't have our attorney on the call. Recent guidance did come out from the state suggesting that you may have that right, because it's within the SB9 guidance. It says up to 2 units per lot, but I would want to bring that back to our city attorney for further review before giving you a firm answer on that.
Okay, thank you.
Other cities are interpreting it that way. So.
Okay, Courtney, do you have any comments on the presentation?
Yeah. Can you hear me okay? Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I just was wondering with the curb cut, I know that there was talk of there was parking in front of the unit. I think it was option A in that last slide that we just reviewed. Having a curb cut of that length, is that a concern for anybody? Is that something that the city wants to really have? I know there's some background noise. I apologize.
Ben, can you pull up that slide? Is it A?
Yeah, A. In terms of having all the parking in the front, having a curb cut that goes from tip to tail of that lot, is that something that the city is, okay with? It seems like option C. Given that it's 3 stories, I'm not quite sure about the 3-story option, but the 2-story option just seems like having that much on-site parking with a curb cut that large.
Well, you're eliminating 2 on-street parking spaces for 4 off-street parking spaces. That's how I view it.
Yeah, you're right.
See, I wouldn't want to see the curb cut and the parking in the front like that. I think we have examples of that in sort of the upper 40s, 46th Avenue and that, where those situations exist right now. And they don't work for me, but that's
well, just considering pedestrian use and the fact that all of Capitola walks, it seems that just accessibility wise, it doesn't seem like a wise option for just the irregularities of, the sidewalk. But I agree with Commissioner Westman with a lot of her sentiments. And then also the massing of a 3-story unit just seems a bit excessive for, the village, basically.
Yeah, Courtney, most of the neighborhoods with the smaller lots don't have sidewalks.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
Ours does.
There's a good percentage of, I'm just saying in terms of like existing neighborhoods that do have sidewalks, it just seems like that would be a lot of cars for the front setback of any given lot. That's just my initial input given this presentation.
Are you leaning towards 3 stories or what would your preference be?
I would be leaning towards 2 stories. I like can you go to the other slide with the maybe the other one? Is there a 3rd or 4th? That one. See where there's some type of configuration where you can enter into, the complex of housing and be able to tuck your car into one I'd be in favor of 3 stories if there's if there's an area to put your car, basically in the structure. If that makes sense.
And then do you have a preference on the height? Like a flat roof or a minimal pitched roof?
I don't really have a preference of pitched roof or flat roof. I think it's kind of based on the design. I don't typically agree that it conforms or is more compatible for Capitola with the pitched roof. I think that you can create a flat roof and make it just as compatible. But in terms of design, but I don't have a preference, no. I think that the allowance of the additional 5 feet for a pitched roof is appropriate. I just don't personally have a preference between the flat or the pitched.
And what about a front porch?
I like the idea of the front porch in the front setback, encouraging that. Whether or not it encroaches the 4 feet or more than that is kind of, I haven't quite come to a conclusion, but I like the front porch within the front setback if it can be incorporated.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Okay, I've got a few comments as well, if everyone else has got their 2 cents in. My 2 cents has to do with, the most important thing to me is an appropriate setback. We talk about 15 feet, but I guess in my mind, what we really care about is that it is setback consistent with the rest of the neighborhood. So you don't want to have a house that's jutting out, even if it's just a porch, that's jutting out beyond the line of houses down the street. So the notion of a setback is it's pedestrian friendly. You're walking down the street, you can see the landscaping, and it gives you a sense of the community is consistent. So from that standpoint, I say that the setback may not necessarily have to be 15 feet, like, depending on like a Riverview. I don't know that there's any setbacks there, but it should be consistent with the neighborhood. So I don't know how you do that. You'd have to do it neighborhood by neighborhood, but that's the general concern with regards to setbacks. I'm okay with the 3-story. The thing that bothers me about that is the daylight plane. So if in fact a pitched roof would create the proper daylight plane so that at least there's some sun in the neighbor's yard, that would be the only reason that I would see a pitched roof. But in general, I agree with Courtney that you can have a flat roof that's compatible with the neighborhood. I noticed in all the designs, they've included the 0 lot line, which I think is good. The side setbacks and the back setbacks, I'm looking through the presentation, and at some places it says 4 feet. I think we all agree that we're okay with 3 feet. With regards to garages, I don't like the notion of parking being handled with garages. I'd rather see something like carports, so that garages, as we all know, turn into storage facilities or extra bedrooms, and so don't really address the parking issue, but carports tend to. So, and if there's a way we can construct this so that the parking is not satisfied with on-site garages, but with on-site carports, I think that better addresses the issue of parking. Let's see. So again, with porches, again, I don't have a problem with the porches, unless of course it juts out into the neighborhood and no one else has a porch, but now all of a sudden you've got this porch jutting out into the street or into the sight line that no one else has the advantage of. So that's my concern with setbacks. I think setback is the most important thing. With regards to parking, I would be okay with parking in the front setback because we know how to do that now with the Hollywood parking and the landscaping. So I'd be more concerned with the setback, but okay with cars there reluctantly. So I think that gives a lot of leeway with a decent setback. You're allowed to go to 3 stories and you're allowed to provide some parking in that setback, but no porches in that setback. Those are my comments. Have you gotten enough out of us, Katie?
I think so. Ben, do you need any other additional information, or Terry?
Nope, this is good. This is a slide that's showing our current plans for our schedule and our next steps. So as Katie mentioned, we are planning to bring a revised ordinance back to you in April 21st. And then if there's a second hearing needed, that would be on May 5th. And then with the plan to take it to the council either April 28th or May 12th, depending on whether there's 1 or 2 hearings with the Planning Commission.
So I would ask for a motion to continue at this point, if appropriate, to the April 21st hearing.
You want to continue this item, not the entire meeting?
This item, SB9, we're going to jump into objective standards next for multifamily.
Does anybody wish to make a motion to continue this until April 21st?
I'll make a motion. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Mick.
I'll move it.
Moved by Commissioner Ruth and seconded by Commissioner Westman.
I have a question.
Question from Commissioner Newman.
So our packet included a couple of ordinances implementing the SB9. Are we continuing the discussion of those ordinances to the April 21st meeting? Are we doing that tonight or what?
That is what the step we're taking right now, is to continue those ordinances to our April 21st.
Okay, so I have some, I went through them and I have some edits, I guess, minor. Maybe I should just direct those to the staff before the meeting so you can, rather than take time at the meeting.
That works for me.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, with that, we can move on. Lost track of my agenda here. We can move on to public hearing letter number 3B, ordinance for objective design standards.
Did we vote on the motion to continue?
Oh, I'm sorry. Right, we only had a motion and a second. Could we have a roll call vote for the continuance?
You probably assumed it was going to pass.
I did. That was a horrible assumption on my part.
Commissioner Christensen,
Aye. Yes.
Commissioner Newman,
Yes.
Commissioner Ruth,
Yes.
Commissioner Westman,
Yes.
Chair Wilk.
Aye. Motion passes. Okay, now we can move on to item 3B, ordinance for objective design standards. Do we have a staff presentation?
Yes, this evening, Ben Noble will be presenting this item.
All right. I will, oh, no. I think that after 2 years of doing this, I do a little better.
It's only when it's a public hearing, does it?
I will share my screen so everyone can see my email, and then I will maximize the presentation.
We can
Okay.
see it. Yeah.
All right, great. So there is a theme in tonight's special meeting of the Planning Commission, and that is standards for multifamily development. And so previously we were talking about SB9 and 2 to 4 unit projects in the R1 zone. And now we're talking about multifamily and mixed use residential development within the multifamily and the mixed use and commercial zoning districts. And so this presentation is about a project that we call the objective standards for multifamily and mixed use development. And tonight I'm going to be providing a little bit of project background in terms of the purpose and origins and the prior meetings and work products. And this is something that previously came before the Planning Commission last year, and we're going to update you on the work that we've done since that last meeting. I'm going to share with you the current draft of these standards and highlight a number of issues that we're requesting your feedback on at this time, as well as any general comments that you have on this. So I guess my suggestion is for me to go through this presentation similar to the first item on the agenda. If there's any public comment, to receive it. And then there's some specific questions that Katie and I are looking for feedback on the Planning Commission tonight. Okay, so the city received a grant a couple of years ago to prepare new objective standards for multifamily and mixed use development. And the purpose of these standards is to have greater clarity and certainty in terms of what is required for multifamily and mixed use residential development. And in particular, to help protect the city in cases where an applicant requests streamlined ministerial approval of the project, or in cases where the city's discretion is limited due to recent state housing laws. And those housing laws include what's known as SB 35. And what that is, and this applies only outside of the coastal zone. So outside the coastal zone, an applicant can request streamlined ministerial approval. So no planning commission review or approval, no design review, no use permit, staff level approval if the project incorporates a certain amount of affordable housing and if the project is consistent with all applicable objective standards. Another state law that's relevant to this is the Housing Accountability Act and SB 330, which was adopted 2 years ago, that amended the Housing Accountability Act. And what those laws say is that the city cannot deny or reduce the density of a proposed multifamily housing project if it's consistent with objective standards, unless the city makes a determination that approving the project as proposed would result in an adverse public health and safety impact. And so that's a high bar to overcome. And then the third state law that's relevant to all of this is the regional housing needs allocation requirement. That's part of state housing element law. And so I think, as you're aware, within the housing element, cities are required to identify adequate sites to accommodate their fair share housing needs allocation for the planning period. And the state and the region establishes a number for each city, and the city needs to demonstrate in the housing element that there are adequate sites to accommodate those units at different income levels. And so for your current housing element, for the 2015 to 23 planning period, Capitola needed to identify adequate sites for 143 total units. The draft RENA for the next planning period, and the city is going to start the process of preparing this housing element update soon, is almost 10 times that amount, which is truly a remarkable difference. And so what that tells me is, or us, assuming that that number remains as it currently is in the draft, is that Capitola will need to increase opportunities for multifamily housing production within the city, and that clear standards, quality standards for multifamily housing, objective standards will become increasingly important due to the greater number of sites and the greater intensity of multifamily housing allowed on those sites within Capitola. So from our perspective, SB 35 combined with the Housing Accountability Act and the RENA requirement in the housing element makes it important that Capitola has quality standards in place, objective standards in place for multifamily and mixed-use residential development. So back in February of last year, there was a Planning Commission study session where we outlined the project goals and approach and received some preliminary feedback from the Planning Commission. We also went to the City Council for their feedback in April of last year. We had a meeting with some stakeholders in July to receive preliminary input on potential draft standards. And those stakeholders include some local architects, housing developers, affordable housing developers, and some residents as well, to receive some feedback on the ideas that we had at that time. We then prepared some draft standards and shared them with the same group of stakeholders in February, that should say 2022, not 2021, and received some feedback on them before revising them and sharing the standards with you at this meeting tonight. So that's the work that we've accomplished. And I wanted to highlight one thing that was from the project approach memo that came to you a year ago. One of the things that we did is we looked at the existing standards within the zoning ordinance and how those standards address important design issues. And what this slide is showing is that these gray boxes are instances where the zoning ordinance is silent on a particular design issue. So for example, in the multifamily zoning district, there are no existing standards relating to building orientation, which means how the entry of the building sort of relates to the street and the sidewalk. There are no limitations on blank walls, no limitations on parking place, or no requirements related to parking placement and screening or driveway width, or the placement of garbage and recycling screening. And so this is, I think, just an example of how currently there is an absence of objective standards related to a number of important design-related issues within a lot of the zoning districts that allow multifamily. And what the city has done historically is relied on subjective design review criteria to make sure that multifamily development projects or mixed-use residential development projects are going to exhibit quality design consistent with the general plan and other community goals. And so, an important part of the approach that was described in the previous memo that went to the Planning Commission is our plan to take the existing subjective design review criteria and translate them into new objective standards where necessary in order to fill the gaps with the existing standards. So that has been what we've been working on. And here's a map that's showing the zoning districts. So this is only for multifamily outside of R1. So all of the yellow areas, we're not talking about that as part of this project. We are talking about the brown areas, which is the residential multifamily districts. We're also talking about the mixed-use neighborhood district on Capitola Road and Capitola Avenue. But we're not talking about the mixed-use village district because we believe we have adequate objective standards in place that were prepared as part of the zoning ordinance update recently. We're also talking about the commercial districts because in the CC district, in the pink areas, both mixed-use residential and residential only multifamily are allowed uses. In the CR district, residential uses are allowed, but only as part of a residential mixed-use project. So we are thinking about standards for the commercial districts, as well as the residential and mixed-use districts, because multifamily residential uses are allowed in those areas. So included in the Planning Commission packet for tonight's meeting is our current working draft of the standards. And as I mentioned previously, these standards would apply to all multifamily and mixed-use residential development in the RM, mixed-use neighborhood, community commercial, and regional commercial districts. They would not apply in the mixed-use village districts, and they would apply to all projects that require design review, as well as projects requesting ministerial approval under SB 35. So these are not standards that are just SB 35 project standards. These would be generally applicable to all multifamily projects, including those that are required to come before the Planning Commission. So the way we set it up in this document is we've grouped the standards into categories that are sort of thematically similar in terms of the contents of the standards within each category. And each category contains an intent statement where it starts with an intent statement that explains what the purpose of the standards are, what we're aiming to accomplish with them. And it's related to the categories are circulation and streetscape, parking and vehicle access, building placement, orientation and entries, building massing, facade and roof design, and then other site features. And so you can see how it starts with sort of the development, sort of site design and its relationship to the public realm. And then it drills down to finer grain detail, to building massing, and then to more to the details of the building facade and other features on the site. And so an important aspect of the approach to this is to provide a pathway for an applicant to request deviations. One thing that's very challenging about preparing new objective standards, and I think all cities who are doing this are experiencing this challenge, is that it's very difficult to develop standards that are going to work for every site, for every project, in every context within the city. And so while we do our best to prepare standards that we think will work for all different scenarios, it is important, we think, to provide a mechanism for a project to request a deviation from those standards. So the way we've set this up is that a proposed project may request a deviation from one or more standard. That's something that the Planning Commission has to approve. And the Planning Commission would be able to approve that deviation upon finding that the project successfully incorporates an alternative method to achieve the intent of the standard. A project that's requesting deviation would not be eligible for for streamline review under SB 35. So if a project wanted to deviate from a standard, that would kick them out of the SB 35, streamline ministerial approval, and back into the city's discretionary process with planning commission approval required.
Question, Ben.
Yes.
So are you suggesting or planning on, in the actual municipal code, you would have statements of intent in addition to the specifics?
Yes. That is the intent.
Okay, so that's good, because that's always something we scratch our heads over. Wonder what the intent of this one was.
Right. The intent is to include the intent. Yeah, and I would consider that a best practice among cities that are establishing new objective standards, is to use these intent statements as a way to communicate what the goal of the standard and what the purpose of the standard is, as well as to provide a framework for cities to allow for deviations to those standards if the project is meeting that intent.
Right.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
Is my recollection correct that this SB 35 is the statute that requires that a developer to qualify for SB 35 only use contractors who pay prevailing wage?
That is correct.
Okay, and I think we discussed this a year ago, and you said that there are a lot of developers taking advantage of this, even though it requires prevailing wage payments. Is that still your observation?
Well, I'm certainly seeing these projects in the Bay Area and higher cost housing markets, and I think Katie may be more current on SB 35 applications in Santa Cruz County than I am.
Yes, so it's my understanding there's been a few that have come through the city of Santa Cruz at this point. I do want to inform the Planning Commission that we have had inquiries, and that is more recently on projects on larger lots within Capitola. So I wouldn't be surprised, although it'd be great to have the standards in place in the properties that we have had inquiries on. They are within the coastal zone, so they wouldn't be subject to SB 35. But
So Ben, before
there
we
is
leave,
there is more traction locally on SB 35 more recently.
Ben, I have a question. If a deviation is brought before the Planning Commission, does that then open the door to address other aspects of the design? Or is the Planning Commission limited to just discussing the deviation?
Well, so if a request for a deviation would kick the project out of the SB 35 process, so it would be subject to the normal design review process where you'd be able to engage on all design related issues that you normally engage in on a project.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and so what Katie and I are looking for tonight is any general comments that you have on the draft standards that are before you. There are three topics in particular that we're most interested in your feedback on, because we think, one, they're particularly important standards, and two, they're standards where we received some feedback from our stakeholder group that there were some concerns with these. And so receiving your feedback on these topics would be helpful to us as we continue to revise and refine this and take an ordinance back to you for your consideration. So those topics are parking placement, entry orientation, and privacy. So I'm going to go through a little bit on those three topics in the remainder of this presentation. So the first subject is parking placement, and draft standard B1 prohibits parking in a required front or street side setback area and between a primary structure and a front or street side property line, with an exception for senior housing or as needed for ADA compliance. So you can see in this diagram on the screen, the area between the building and the street. No surface parking would be allowed in those areas. And also surface parking would not be allowed in required setback areas that are not between the building and the street. So that's the draft standard. When we talked about this with the stakeholder group, we looked at a number of examples of existing multifamily development in Capitola related to parking placement, just to sort of give a sense of the existing development pattern and how this issue relates to neighborhood compatibility and project design. So here's an example of a project or a property on Capitola Road and 30th Avenue near the city boundaries, where you can see parking is located between the buildings and on the street at the corner of the parcel. And here's what it looks like from the street. There's the parking, there's the building with this sort of landscape strip between the two. Here's another example on Plum Street of parking that's located between the building and the street within a carport. Here's what that looks like from the street. Here's an example of parking in a carport on 47th Avenue with sort of a shallow carport area, relatively shallow carport area between the building and the street with no sidewalk there. Here's an example of a recently constructed project in Capitola, the Terra Court project, where parking is not located between the building and the street. There's a central drive aisle and parking is accessed from that central drive aisle. Here's some examples of recently constructed multifamily development in Santa Cruz, where parking is located behind the main building. Here's another project in Capitola where it's structured ground floor parking access from the side. Here's an example of some townhomes in Scotts Valley where parking is accessed from the rear. And so when we talked about this with the stakeholder group, there was concern that prohibiting parking between the building and the street in the manner that the standard does would not be appropriate for all types of projects in all locations. I think in response to that, we added the exception for age-restricted senior housing as well as ADA compliance. But we're sort of interested in the Planning Commission's reaction to this standard, what your thoughts are, and if there are project types or locations in addition to senior housing where you think that surface parking should be allowed between a building and a street. So that's one question that we're interested in on. And then related to that is entry orientation. I think the parking placement and entry orientation in many cases are related to one another. So the draft standard currently is that, for one building with a single primary entrance, the entrance must face the street. For units with individual exterior entrances, if there's a ground floor unit adjacent to the street, the entrance to that unit must be oriented towards the street rather than the interior of the lot. If you have units that are not immediately adjacent to the street and they're on the ground floor, those entrances can face the interior of the lot, obviously, because they don't have any street access. In response to stakeholder feedback, we carved out a couple of exceptions to this requirement. We heard from the stakeholder group that there are roadway segments that have high volume traffic, that are wide with multiple vehicle lanes, where having street facing entrances to housing just is not appropriate. In response to that feedback, we identified a number of locations where the street facing entries for a residential only project would not be required. That's shown on this map. So the CC district fronting Capitola Road, 41st Avenue, south of Capitola Road. It actually should be just to Jade Street. That's an error in the map. And Bay Avenue in the CC district. I'm not showing the CR, the 41st Avenue fronting the CR district, because in the CR district, you can't have a residential only project. It must be a mixed use project with both residential and commercial components. So I think the considerations are different for that type of project. So, when looking at this with the stakeholder group, we were looking at example development in Capitola. So here's a multifamily project on Rosedale. Here's what it looks like from the street, where the entrances are oriented towards a primarily interior parking lot. And that's what it looks like from the street, with landscaping between the building and the sidewalk. Here's another example on Capitola Avenue, where the primary entrances are oriented towards the interior of the lot. But in this case, there is a sidewalk, there is a pathway that's connecting the sidewalk to the building, and there's sort of a way to access the building through this breezeway of sorts. You can access the unit from the sidewalk in that way, even though the unit entrances themselves are not oriented towards the street. Here's the Bay Avenue senior apartments, where I think actually the ground floor units facing Bay Avenue do have their primary, or do have an entrance that's facing the Bay Avenue. So here's a project on Clares Street, a narrow, deep parcel where the entrances to the units are oriented from the side drive aisle, and the end unit that faces Clare Avenue, it's the side of the unit and the side yard with a fence that faces the street. So with the stakeholder group, we were looking at these examples of existing multifamily development in Capitola. We were also looking at some examples in Santa Cruz and elsewhere in the area. Here's a similar narrow, deep parcel in Santa Cruz, not too different from the Clares Avenue example we were just looking at, where the end unit, the entrance to that end unit is oriented towards the street rather than the interior of the lot. And so this project would be consistent with the standard, the way that we drafted it. So again, here's looking at the Terra Court project in Capitola, where the entrances of those end units that face the street are oriented towards the street. So this project also would be consistent with the standard as we drafted it. Here's a recent development project in Santa Cruz, where there's one primary entrance to this building that faces the street. That would be consistent with our standard. Here's Walnut Commons in Santa Cruz. Same type of project would be consistent with the standard, with one entrance that, or where multiple primary entrances on each street frontage oriented towards the street. Here's another project. I think this actually appeared in the slideshow for the SB9 work, but here's a multi-unit project in Palo Alto where the entry to that end unit is oriented towards the street and therefore would be consistent with the standard, the way that we've drafted it. Here this is an interesting building where it's essentially townhomes, but it's designed more to read as a single multifamily building. Each unit has its own independent entrance that is oriented towards the street. So this would be consistent with our standards. So as I mentioned previously, we received feedback from our stakeholder group that there needs to be exceptions for projects that are facing high volume roadways. And so we incorporated that into the draft standards that are before the Planning Commission tonight. And so we're interested in your feedback on that and whether or not there are other project types or locations where street-facing building entrances should not be required. Another possibility is just to not have any standard about entrance orientation at all. That is a possibility as well. Okay, and so the last issue that we're calling out for Planning Commission feedback has to do with privacy. So in the draft standards, we have two options related to balconies and roof decks. Option one is to prohibit balconies, roof decks, and other usable outdoor building space on upper story facades that are abutting an R1 district. When we shared this with the stakeholder group, they took issue with this. The feedback that we received is that, as infill development occurs and as there is an increase in residential density and intensities in Capitola and other places, that providing for private outdoor usable open space is important as an amenity for residents, and Capitola should not unduly limit that for these types of projects. So in light of that feedback, we included another option, which is to require an increased setback and landscaping for these upper story balconies when abutting an R1 district, but not to prohibit them outright. So we're interested in what standards, if any, the Planning Commission thinks that we should be including to address privacy impacts from balconies and other outdoor building spaces. And I understand that this has been a topic of conversation with the Planning Commission in the past on other projects. So we wanted to highlight that for your feedback. So, so that ends my presentation. So as I mentioned, we're interested in general comments that you have on the draft standards that are before you tonight. And then in particular, we're interested in feedback that you have on three specific topics: the parking placement, the entry orientation, and privacy. And after receiving your feedback tonight, the plan is for us to take an ordinance to you at the same meeting as the SB9 ordinance on April 21st for your review and comment. And ultimately, you'll need to be making a recommendation that will go before the City Council.
So can I ask a process question, just so I understand?
Sure.
So what I'm hearing is that if we adopt these standards and someone comes in under SB 35 and they want to get their project approved, that project would never come to the Planning Commission. It simply gets approved at the staff level.
If the project is consistent with standards and meets all of the other SB 35 eligibility requirements.
Okay. So if a project comes in, an infill project, and it doesn't meet these standards, they would ask for a deviation. An example would be that they wouldn't want to have all of the front entryways located on the street.
They could request
So
that.
so they wouldn't have to follow these standards. They then just would have to go through a planning process.
Well, and our intention with this is for the planning commission to have to find that even with the deviation, the project meets the intent of the statement, the intent of the standard.
Right. So the planning commission could find, for example, that the project was designed so the street frontage, was pleasing and looked like an entry area, even though the entry area is actually on the side.
Right. Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. that's
So-
the idea.
Okay, so any changes to anything that is in these standards requires a project to come to the planning commission.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Can I jump in and make a general comment that hopefully the planning commission will chew on as they make their comments? And that is your intent, specifically the circulation and streetscape. You're very clear on the intent. And what I think is a bullet is missing. And in fact, I'd replace the first bullet, which is the visual character and aesthetic qualities of the city, because I think that's a slippery slope. But one that I think does make more sense is to maintain a sense of community as a bullet. And I'm thinking of Jane Jacobs, Katie, when I say that, because then when you can say, okay, the front door orientation, that's consistent with people communicating with each other. They're on the street, that's pedestrian friendly. Same with windows, all these kinds of things. You could say, okay, you're not meeting the window requirement or the front entrance requirement, but because you nevertheless still are creating this sense of community with your people size scale and there's other things, therefore we will grant a deviation. And so I'm suggesting that there might be a bullet in the intent statement regarding the sense of community that will give us an opportunity to allow deviations.
I'm not certain sense of community is an objective standard.
Well, neither is visual character and aesthetic qualities. That's very subjective. So, and again, you'd almost have to, and maybe Katie could help with the wording, but again, I'm thinking specifically of a textbook that talks about, how do you reduce crime in an area? How do you create more vibrant community? And it has to do with how you structure your buildings. Do they face the street? Do they require a lot of pedestrian interfacing? And so there's a listing almost of items that the textbooks say, okay, this is if you want to maintain a sense of community, these are the things you can do in your buildings that will actually help that.
So the intent sections aren't objective, Commissioner Westman. If you look at them, almost all of them are subjective. It's just the standards that are objective.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay,
But I think
Commissioners, I have another commitment this evening that I'm going to have to leave. And I would just like to voice my objections to balconies on these buildings. I think Ben mentioned privacy is a concern for those residents in that building, but it's also a concern for whoever it gets built next to. So I would object to the inclusion of balconies on those and not allow those. And the rest of the things I'm going to defer to my fellow planning commissioners and their good judgment. So Katie knows I have this appointment, so I'm going to have to run. So good luck.
Thank you, Commissioner Ruth. Okay, are we ready to go ahead and ask for public comments then, since the presentation is complete?
Yes, so we've got 2 attendees and I'm not seeing a hand raised there. Now I'll go to our public comment email. And surprisingly, there are no comments this evening on this, so no public comment this evening.
All right, very good. Then we can move on to commissioners' comments. Anybody want to jump in?
Can we put the screen up with the items they wanted us to address?
Sure.
And I just wanted to let Chair Wilk know I've noted your previous comment, and I think we can accommodate that in the intents section.
Oh, thank you.
There,
I also have the standards themselves. If
we want the screen with the the issues. Yeah. So my general comment is that I went through this whole set of objective standards, and I'm very impressed with what the staff and the stakeholders have done to put this together. If we ever use it, but it was a very impressive job. I don't see the merit to requiring street-facing entrances only. And as far as we spent a lot of time on balconies and decks, as Ben mentioned, and I think I don't agree with Commissioner Ruth that they need to be banned completely, but I think that we can mitigate the use of balconies and decks for social events by regulating their size, which is, I think, what we talked about doing. And I think we also prohibited them from being on certain sides of the building. And I think those kinds of standards would be sufficient. And the other thing is the parking placement. I don't have any opinion about that.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Newman. Anyone else?
Hey, I'll make my comments. So for me, I do have concern about the parking placement. When I look at the project that's on Capitola Road and 30th that we were shown the example of, I think that they've done an excellent job on that particular project of screening the parking that's on the street. So, you know, it's a very pleasant vista when you're looking at that project. But I'm concerned about projects coming in and not having done that kind of landscaping and buffering for the parking under SB 35, and then we wouldn't have any avenue to deal with it. So for me, I would like to see, you know, if we are going to say that, you know, parking can be in the front, that there's some standards in there about how it has to be screened and landscaped to go along with that option. I agree with Commissioner Newman. I don't think we have to say that, you know, all projects, the orientation has to be to the street. I think that can be, again, addressed by having some requirement, you know, that the front of the building, you know, be pedestrian friendly. You know, I don't know exactly how you come up with the right terms for that, but something so that we're not going to have, just a front facade where there's no entry features related to it. For me, on the privacy thing, I don't want to see the decks or the balconies abutting the R1 neighborhoods on second stories. Certainly people can have decks and balconies in the interior project in the areas that butt up to other multifamily or commercial districts, but I do have concern about second story decks next to single family residential.
What about frontage on the front of the house?
They could be on the front of the house. They can be in the interior part of a multifamily project. They can be on the part of the multifamily project that faces other multifamily or commercial projects. I'm just saying that when they abut next to an R1, I have concerns about that. So those are my comments.
Okay.
Can I ask one clarifying point about the entry orientation? Were the comments that you'd like at least one, or is it okay if there actually is not an entrance on a street fronting?
Well, I would prefer to have at least one. I mean,
Okay.
I don't know how else you do it without there being an actual, some sort of entry on the street, but. And that, and that doesn't mean every project's going to have to do it, because if they decide not to do that, they would just ask for a deviation and show us how they were making it pedestrian friendly without that.
Okay, thank you.
Courtney, do you have anything?
I do. I wanted to mention the Commissioner Wilkes' comment about having the additional point about community interaction. I think that relates well to having the entrance on the street, kind of what was Commissioner Westman just touched on, is having one entrance on the street, encouraging community involvement, just having, people just in and around front yards, having that type of involvement, I think is important for the community. As it relates to those side streets, having the entrances facing the interior of the parcel with, the limited drive and the parking entrances with the street going down the center or to the side of the lot is, I would say, preferred in my mind. And trying not to skip anything, I was making notes. The central drive aisle, I think, is good. When I think Commissioner Newman touched on not banning the second story decks, but just, making the necessary setbacks, or I do have concern if it was a giant 3-story building that abuts to an R1, that is pretty intrusive. So I would say contextually, project to project, I think we should be able to evaluate that and not just completely ban it altogether, but really evaluate whether or not that's an appropriate application to have that type of balcony or second story outdoor area. But I don't think we should just eliminate it. Just regulate it, basically. Did I miss anything? Those are points.
For parking placement, are there project types or locations where surface parking should be allowed between the building and the street?
I don't have a huge opinion on that. I think that, again, contextually from project to project, I think that having that central drive is really a nice application. I think just getting the parking tucked into the building area and not right in front of in the setback of the front yard would be my preference.
So are you suggesting that we have a requirement for a central driveway?
No, not a requirement. And it's just, I think that I just hate to see there be a requirement, like a hard and fast requirement. It kind of eliminates being able to evaluate the design context, but I understand the need for structure and requirements.
Okay. Anything
I
else?
think it's my 2 cents so far.
Okay, I have a few comments. Again, I went through this whole thing and I had comments on a lot of pages. I won't go through all of them. But I had to wrap my head around, well, how do I evaluate this? And again, I go back to this sense of community thing, eyes on the street. So then when I look at, okay, doors facing the street, I do agree with that for that very reason. Again, sense of community, people playing in the front yards, like Courtney said, whatnot. I probably only need just the one entrance, just of the front facing unit. Obviously, if it's multi-units, they can't all have somehow doors. I mean, obviously but you said that would meet the requirement with just the street facing one. So I agree with that. I also agree with your notion. You talked about blank spaces. You talked about windows, number of windows, all these things, even porches, balconies out front, all those things I would agree with, because they, again, create that sense of community, the eyes on the street, that kind of thing. What I don't agree with is throughout this presentation, you go in with design elements that I think are too far reaching. You talk about arbors over the garage, windows in the garage door, windows that have to be recessed, they must have windowsills, the railing design has to be open frame. All of those things are design details that are too specific. And again, so if you have the sense of community and say, yeah, you must have windows, yeah, you must have front facing doors, yeah, you have, if you just check those boxes, but not go into the design details, oh yeah, the garage door has to be recessed 18 inches. Where does that come from? Well, let the architects do their job. With regards to your specific questions, I agree with Susan about the buffering the front parking in the front. Initially, I said, no, we shouldn't do that. But obviously you brought up a bunch of examples where it makes a lot of sense. But the best example was if you had some buffering. So the examples where you had the shortened garage or carport and all that stuff, obviously, nobody really likes that. If you can avoid it, let's do it. So the buffering with the landscaping, or the buffering between the street and the exposed parking, that's a great idea. With regards to the balconies or the entry orientation, I already mentioned that. I like that idea. With regards to the balconies, one question is does this also apply to commercial buildings? So you're talking about balconies on commercial buildings, such that like a restaurant, we're ruling on balconies on those?
Only residential.
So it is residential, but it could be residential over commercial, and the residential is on top.
Right.
So, okay, good. So I don't really have I'm probably the most liberal in terms of allowing balconies to the group. I think it's important that people, they're not interested in staring at the neighbor's yard. They want the fresh air, the possible view, the sunshine, and all that good stuff. So I don't have a problem with balconies. You can try to construct something that appeals to the rest of the planning commissioners, but you'll get my vote. I had a bunch of other comments, but I think that's the gist of it. And I think that's it. So those are comments from all your commissioners.
So I have one minor final comment, if I can.
Okay.
I don't know where it was, but it seems like in some places we talk about prohibiting vacation rentals. In other places, we talk about not rentals being required to be more than 30 days. Can we just be consistent through whatever the city ordinances we have and use one term if it's vacation rental or the 30-day requirement?
Yep, we can do
Pretty
that.
certain I read it in here and they both were used.
Okay. I'm just looking at all my last, oh, I have a very specific question. With regards to refuge storage areas, you talk about the containers have to be hidden with a minimum height of 5 feet for carts and cans and 7 feet for dumpsters. I have a 4-foot container in my yard, and it more than covers the garbage cans, and plus it gives a less of a wall feeling, and you can actually put something on top. So I think your numbers are wrong. They should be not 5 feet and 7, but 4 and 6. Then you talk about mechanical screening, equipment screening, and you talk about they have to, all the vents and the stacks and all the mechanical stuff, air conditioning on the rooftop have to be screened from view. I think as long as it's screened from street view, that's all we care about.
But remember, these are projects you're not going to get to review.
Right. So your point being?
The point being, if we don't have some standards in here about things like windows and, refuge enclosures, a project could come through and you're not going to have a chance to review it if it's under SB 35. It'll just get built.
Right, but I'm just suggesting that we do have those standards. I did suggest that we have window requirements and all these things. I'm just saying we don't need to get too detailed into the design features. And then specifically on refuse containers, yeah, I agree that they need to be screened, but I think they don't need to be completely enclosed. You just need reasonable screening. So those are my comments.
Can I ask a clarifying question on that? So you mentioned mechanical equipment being screened.
It's page.
From.
Go ahead.
Is that, I'm not looking at the actual standard, but I know sometimes these occur on the rooftop mechanical and then also at the ground level. And it sounded like you definitely wanted to make sure that they were not visible from the street, but if they're next to residential properties, they would also, would you want them screened from for the adjacent neighbor? Or I think that was the intent there, was to not only protect the street frontage, but also the neighbors.
Oh, you're saying that the neighbor on the second floor would not want to stare at these vents either. I
The
think
neighbor next door.
Well, I mean, in my house, I stare down at the village. I can see every rooftop in the whole village, and it's like, well, how much screening do you need? I would think street level would be acceptable, but that's just my opinion. Do we need to continue this as well, or is this all you need from us?
We do need to continue this. This has been noticed for public hearing, and at the next meeting, we'll have the draft ordinance in play. So
I'll make a motion to continue it to, I think is it April 21st?
It is.
Okay, I have a motion from Commissioner Westman. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Second from
Motion.
Commissioner Christensen. Could I have a roll call vote, please, for continuance of item B?
Sure. Commissioner Christensen,
Aye.
Commissioner Newman,
Aye.
Commissioner Westman,
Aye.
and Commissioner Root is gone. Chair Wilk.
Aye. So the motion passes with one abstention. Are we ready to move on to the director's report, or are we finished with items A and B?
We're ready to move on.
Let's move on into the director's report, item 4.
I will
Okay.
sign off. So thank you. Planning
Well, thank you,
Commission.
Ben. Oh, let me just
Thank
say
you.
before you sign off, thank you very much. This work was exceptional. I agree with Commissioner Newman that I was very impressed with the amount of work that you and Terry and staff did on this. And it I rarely am grateful to consultants, but this seems to have been worthwhile. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Ben. Terry.
Bye, Ben.
Bye-bye.
Go ahead.
Okay, director's report. I did want to let you know that we recently received an update from the Coastal Commission regarding our outdoor dining ordinance. And we're hoping to have the outdoor dining ordinance be reviewed by the Coastal Commission in April. However, there are a couple items that we're not in agreement over. One is regarding the fee collection, where they had asked us to dedicate a certain amount of fees towards coastal resources, and we had suggested that 50% could be dedicated towards coastal resources. They came back asking for 100% dedication, so we're working through that with them at this time, and it is holding us up from moving forward. They also asked that the ordinance essentially make all of the permits temporary and that they would expire within 3 years. We really like the idea as the property owner, as the city who owns the right of way, to have the ability to just not extend our agreements for utilizing the street, the area, the right of way within the street. So there would be leases tied to 3 years, and then the city council, after the 3-year period, would make a decision on whether or not they'd review our program and decide whether or not to extend the program. However, the Coastal Commission is requesting that we put expirations to our coastal development permits within the ordinance, which is not a typical procedure, expiring CDPs that are tied to a land use. So we're not in agreement at this point. It's not going to hearing in April. I am bringing forth next week the prototype design for you to take a first look at. So we're going to continue working through some items, but the original timeline is being set back, and we are one of the first cities to have an ordinance into the Coastal Commission. The other update is at the state level, they've extended outdoor dining through December. So it doesn't, our city council is going to need to make a decision about our temporary ordinance at this point. And we continue to work with the Coastal Commission staff. We have we've got meetings planned, and I hope to give you another update soon. But that's it for your director's report tonight, and I really appreciate the extra time with these special meetings. SB9 Ordinance and the objective standards for multifamily are a big undertaking. I don't think there's any way that this would have fit into our regular agenda, and very thoughtful, meaningful feedback tonight. So I really just appreciate your time and thoughtfulness. Thank you.
Katie. Any commission comments, commission communications, last minute words or announcements?
Just
Time for dinner.
one quick comment on the Coastal Commission requirement that all the fees for the outdoor dining be earmarked for coastal resources. My recollection is that's only a small part of what Capitola actually commits to coastal resources, so that you really can mitigate that by modifying the other portion that the city commits to coastal resources.
Yeah, we're also, I don't know, did you, I'm not sure if any of you noticed, but we're putting together a parking, we're going to relook at parking in the village. That was something actually that came out of the Planning Commission review of the outdoor dining, and City Council was at the same time that we're going forward with that, was like, we really need to look at the overall outdoor, the parking in the village in terms of like residential parking permits, loading and offloading. So that's something that our public works director heard from during those meetings. And right now there's a a committee being formed. It was publicly noticed that for people who are interested can get involved. So the thing is, under this 25 spaces for the dining ordinance, it is true, like those 25 spaces, we definitely spend that much money towards coastal resources every year. When we move forward, whenever we update our parking in the village, it requires a CDP. And so then one thing is that if we say yes now to 100% dedication of fees, when we go forward for, say, a fee increase in the village, will that same requirement be attached to this? So we're just being careful and working through it. So, okay.
Any other commission comments? Okay, when is our next meeting? April 8th?
Next week, the April 7th,
Okay,
regular planning commission meeting.
7 o'clock.
I think you've got 5 items on that agenda. So
Very good.
that packet will come out
Until
tomorrow.
April 7th at 7 o'clock, this meeting is adjourned.
Night, everyone.
Good night.
Bye.
Thank you.